Before we get started, I wanted to remind you that there are some handouts back on the sound booth. If you did not pick up the ABC Bible verse memory sheet that I had from a few weeks ago, that's back there. I also have a list of suggested memory verses for teens back there. So if you want to pick that up, if you have older kids or if you have little kids, the alphabet Bible memory list was cute. I showed that video a few weeks ago. Also, I told you that I was going to share with you a couple of websites this week that I had left in my office last week that I think would be really helpful when we're talking about environment and creating a healthy environment for our kids, and that we can control, what is going on in our home, what they're seeing and experiencing, etc. And the two websites that I think are great because they review apps, they review movies, TV shows, etc., are pluggedin.com. Some of y'all may already be familiar with that. That is actually a Christian website. And then there's bark.com, which is not Christian, quote unquote, but there's some good information in there, particularly on which apps might be dangerous for your kids to be using. So I told y'all I'd bring those this week. Just wanted you to know that before we get started. I am going to go ahead and start, though, on time today because we have a lot to go through this morning. So I'm going to begin with prayer. So if you'll just close your eyes with me, we're going to go before the Lord this morning. Dear Heavenly Father, just like every week, Lord, we're just so grateful that we have the freedom to come together and worship together each week with our church family. Lord, I thank you for this important topic that we're discussing this week about communicating with our kids. Father, I just pray that our words would always honor you and make your heart happy, Lord. I pray that you would help all of us as we're seeking to communicate well with our kids and to create an environment that they feel comfortable talking to us, Lord. So I pray that you would just show us the things that you want us to take away from the lesson this morning. And it's in your Son's name I pray. Amen. Okay, so we're going to be talking about healthy and effective communication. Last week, I briefly went over God consciousness with you, which is helping your kids see God in the environment, and also to start pointing out to them how God is communicating with them. Then we got to hear from Whitney Pruitt. Thank you, Whitney. You did an awesome job last week about communicating with younger kids. She just did such a great job and had some really helpful information with that. So as we're moving into talking about communicating, I have a little object lesson. Some of you have seen this before, and that's okay. It's a good reminder if you've seen it. If not, this will be new for you. It's something you can also use with your kids. So I need a volunteer to come up and help me with this. Who would like to volunteer? Crystal, come on. Okay, so I have a tube of toothpaste. So some of you, this may give it away for some of you that know what we're doing, and a plate. I'm going to explain the significance of those in a minute. But first, I just want you to take this toothpaste and squeeze out a big pile onto that plate. Perfect, that's enough, good. Okay, so now I want you to take the spoon or either the two toothpicks and put as much of that toothpaste as you can back into the tube. You can use whichever one you want.
You realize I have toddlers, right? It's going to take a while. Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
It's hard to get it in there, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who have not seen this, the toothpaste represents our words that come out of our mouth, okay? And the plate represents our child, or it could be your spouse if you're communicating with them. Even if she had been able to get the majority of the toothpaste back in the tube, there's still going to be a little bit of residue left on the plate. The point of this object lesson is that we need to be careful with our words, okay? Because if we're saying things that are hurtful or mean, even if you say you're sorry, you're still going to have some sort of residue left on here. Saying you're sorry is like putting some of the toothpaste back in the tube, right? You can say you're sorry different ways. Like you can put it back in different ways into the tube. But that doesn't take away the fact that there's still some residue left from that mean encounter, bad conversation that you had that caused harm and hurt. Obviously, we want the words that come out of our mouth to be positive and life-giving to our kids. So you want your residue that's left after your interactions with them to be positive and good so that you're building up good things in their life. So that's a good one you can use with your kids if you want to, just to talk to them about, we have to be careful with our words. It's hard to take them back. And unfortunately, I think as adults, we have already learned that. And sometimes it's really hard when we say things that we're really sorry that we said. So today, we're going to be talking about the 5 elements of healthy communication. Last week, we went over just a couple of Bible verses. I think they're about to come up. A couple of verses, and we're going to be talking about those some more as we're going through the lesson today, but these are the ones that we introduced last week. So now we're going to go to the 5 elements of healthy and effective communication. The 5 elements are, number 1, healthy and effective communication keeps the relationship first. Healthy and effective communication is clear. It's responsive rather than reactive. It shows respect, and it's grace-filled, okay? Okay, so we're going to go through each one of these, and I'm going to give you some examples of each so that you'll understand what all of those mean. From Proverbs 15:1, as we're going over number 1, which is keeping the relationship first, it says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." In keeping the relationship first, you always want to find ways to minimize friction with your kids. There's going to be friction, you're going to have fights, but you do want to find ways to minimize friction. Especially when there's regular conflict. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of that. Say that you have a young child, and your young child is in elementary school, and you're fighting every day over what they're wearing to school, okay? Because they've got it, maybe it bothers you that it's mismatched, maybe it's not school-appropriate clothing, whatever it is. And unfortunately, the more that you have these negative interactions, the more it does start to damage the relationship, and it's over clothes of all things. But one of the things you can do is step back from situations like that and think, what can I do creatively to minimize conflict so that this is not happening all of the time? So some suggestions with that might be that you make a drawer or a shelf in the closet that's all of their school outfits, and it has the bottom and the top matched together. If it's hang clothes, part of the closet's the hang clothes that are the school clothes. You might have another drawer or part of the closet that's church clothes. The great thing about that is your child obviously wants some independence. That's why you're having this battle anyway, because they want to dress themselves for school, right? So you're still allowing that child to have the choice of what they wear. But you can tell them, this drawer is everything you can wear to school. You get to pick what you wear, but it has to come out of this drawer or this section that's for church or whatever. Now, obviously, there's times where you have a wedding or something and you have to help them to know what to wear. But that's just a creative way to minimize friction. I was thinking about an example from our home. One of our kids always ran late in the morning, okay? And it was starting to cause conflict, especially as we got into the middle school years. And it almost caused my other child to get detentions 2 different times. And we were having a fight every morning. I would get furious because I was like, why can't you be at the car on time? I've given you all this time. I've told you we're leaving in 5 minutes, all the things. And they were still late. So what happened is we had a big fight. My other child was mad at them too. And then we leave them and drop them off at school just having had this horrible interaction in the car. I'm feeling bad about it. My child is feeling bad about it. So some wise people helped me with this years ago. I realized, again, I needed to step back because this was becoming a regular conflict that was starting to really hurt our relationship. And what I did is I prayed, and I was like, God, this is awful. There's got to be a better way than having this fight every morning. And thinking back to what some other people shared, I realized that it would be helpful if I was calm, because I was raising my voice because I would get so upset about this every morning, and I knew that that's not helping. So if I could somehow calmly present information to my child and come up with a good, calm way to resolve this, it would be helpful. So that afternoon, when everybody had had a day at school and he had had a little time to decompress, I sat down and I said, I have been really sad in the mornings. And I feel like you probably have been too. This has not been fun to have this fight and this battle over if we're getting in the car on time in the mornings, okay? And so I was really thinking about what could we do to solve this problem. And I said, so I came up with 2 choices, and these are the choices. My car is gonna leave the driveway at 7:40. I would like for you to be in the car, so that you don't have, zeros for what you miss at school and all of that. I would recommend that you be in the car. However, if you are not in the car and I have to take you or your dad has to take you on their way to work, you will lose your privilege of Xbox or whatever it is, okay? But I waited, had a calm conversation when I wasn't mad, and laid out the 2 choices. I was kind and respectful, but that worked actually pretty well, okay? And plus, because I had had the respect to sit down with the child outside of the time when I was mad. Being mad is not when you need to try to resolve these things, okay? That's not a good time to do it. So I sat down with them later to do that. And that seemed to work. So there's lots of different ways that you can keep your relationship first and protect your interactions with your kids by coming up with creative things you can do. The next part of that, of keeping the relationship first, is earn respect instead of inducing fear, okay? Your child can fear consequences, but we don't want them to fear the words that come out of our mouths. They could fear like, okay, they're gonna give me a consequence, but you don't wanna say harsh and mean things to your child in the middle of a conflict, okay? Because that induces fear on their part. You always want your kids to know you love them. And there is a way, teachers in the room know, to discipline kids and still let them know how much you love them. And they get it. They do get that. And they can tell if you really love them. So a couple of things you can do to earn respect instead of inducing fear is you want to always separate your child from the behavior that you don't like, okay? And I'm going to explain how you would say these things. So some things you should not say if your child is doing something that you don't like. Let's give a scenario. Say that you're mad because your child has just hit their sibling, okay? What you don't want to say to your child is, why are you always so mean? You are such a bad kid. Like, and say negative things about them, because that's insinuating that that's who the child is. When you say, why are you bad? You see what I'm saying? Why are you always mean? The thing you do want to say is, I really don't like how you're treating your brother. We don't hit. That's not something we do in our house. Do you see the difference between those 2 things? One is addressing the actual issue, but it's not giving ownership to the child and making it like who they are. Because if you start to say, you're a mean kid, you're a bad kid, over and over, unfortunately, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but it becomes their internal dialogue over time. Just like a kid, and teachers know what I'm talking about here. There are kids in classes that get in trouble all the time, and they're told they're mean, they're bad. And so they start to believe that, and they even start acting on that after a while. So it's so important that we're careful to make sure that we are not, or that we are separating the child from any behaviors that they're exhibiting. Also, some parents, and this is sad, but will go as far as to say, I don't like you. I wish you were never born. I wish I never had kids. Okay, all these things are so incredibly hurtful. And again, those are insinuating that that's part of who the child is. I don't like you. I wish I'd never had you. I wish you were never born. So, those kind of words are the things that we're talking about when we're talking about fear. You will earn your child's respect if you can discipline and love and not let your words get out of control and create a sense of fear of the words that are going to come out of your mouth, okay? Some of you may have experienced that kind of thing in your past, and it's very, very hard. Okay, the last part of keeping the relationship first is building up rather than tearing down. In Ephesians 4:29, it says, "Don't let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs." Okay, so I always say this little phrase. I say, speak life into your kids. What I mean by that is, if you want your child to be responsible, find something they're doing that's responsible. And sometimes you're like, I remember thinking, there's not one responsible thing this kid's doing. You know, I'm sure you've been there. Or you want them to be kind, but they have been a pill all week. And you're like, I haven't seen one kind thing. It's hard. But what you want to do is find the one thing. It might even be just that they brought the right books home from school. That was so responsible that you remembered to pack up your books and you brought the right things home today. Whatever you can find, because that is telling the child the positive things about themselves. I saw that you were responsible. Kids want to please you, okay? Deep down, that's what they really want. And so if you can find things they're doing, or maybe they've been real ugly to their sibling, but they do one kind thing, okay? Hand them another toy or whatever that was nice, or share. Then you say, hey, I really appreciate how kind you were to your sister or brother or whatever. So you want to speak the words into them that you want to see them exhibit that behavior, basically, okay? And that also helps to build your child up rather than tearing them down. Okay, and make sure, like I said, to really point out those things. And if you are working on a specific trait, like responsibility or being more kind or trustworthy, make sure you're really paying attention to when that child is doing those things so that you can praise them for it, okay? Okay, so now let's go on to the second element of healthy and effective communication. Healthy and effective communication is clear. Matthew 5:37 says, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." One way with kids to have clarity in communication is having them repeat what you say. And I'm sure a lot of you have done that. But it really is helpful if you're like, hey, we're going to have dinner in 5 minutes. I need you to clean this up, wash your hands, come to dinner. Sometimes, especially if you feel like they're not paying attention, you can say, hey, what did I just say? They repeat it back, you know they heard it. So then they're responsible for the information because they actually did hear it, right? Okay. So also there are times where we need to repeat what they say. Say your child comes home and they say, this was a terrible day. Miss so-and-so was really mean and called me out in front of my friends, et cetera. And you might say it a little differently, but you might say, I'm so sorry that you had a bad day and that, you're upset because your teacher wasn't nice to you. It lets them know that you actually heard what they said. And sometimes that's important. They need to know that we're actually really hearing what they're saying. So I think definitely repeating both ways, having them repeat or you repeat, can really keep communication clear. The other thing I really love about that is even if you're having a conversation with your spouse, you can say, okay, so what I hear you saying is, and you repeat it, because sometimes a correction needs to be made, and you'd much rather make the correction on the front end of the conversation than have a conflict later. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that you're repeating those words and making sure that there's clear understanding about what it is that you're trying to communicate. Okay, the second part of being having clear communication is following through. And I know this is really hard sometimes. Please don't make empty threats to your kids. I know we've all done it. I've done it. Everybody's done it at different times. Again, remember the verse we just said from Matthew about let your yes be yes and your no be no. You want your kids to trust what you're saying, okay? When there's no follow through or you give them 4 or 5 chances, they don't trust what you're saying, okay? And I think it is a trust issue. I could say the word believe, which is similar, but I think that they quit trusting our word and it actually creates insecurity. Because when you've told your child to do something 12 times and you're never following through, you say, okay, if you do that again, you're going to have to go to timeout. Or if you do that again, this is what's going to happen, but you never do it. First of all, kids learn how they can work us really fast. They just do. Every kid finds, our little weak points. They don't realize that's what they're doing. But they go, how can we work our parents, to get what we want? And they know if you're not going to follow through. So You want your child to be secure, and it actually makes them secure and feel like, hey, mom or dad or aunt or uncle or whoever, they have control of this situation because they're actually following through. They're doing what they said they were going to do. They may not always be happy about it, but you do have that control over the situation. Now, I'm going to say this. If you have not been following through, you can start that today, okay? But, especially if you've been not following through very well for a while, you are going to have a battle on your hands for a little bit, okay? I had a student in my class, and we were at a swim party, and her mom had asked her to get out of the pool 3 or 4 times. Her mom was getting really exasperated because her child would not get out of the pool. I walked over. I said, Jennifer, your mom said it's time to go. You need to get out of the pool. Jennifer got out of the pool. Her mom said, how did you do that? And anyway, we had an opportunity because conferences were coming up, and we discussed that later, and she said, she never does what I ask her to do. And I said, well, how many times are you asking her to do it? How many times are you threatening things and not doing it? And she's like, oh, a lot. And I said, okay, well, so here's the deal. Anytime you turn a ship, it takes time. And so in order to change that behavior, they're going to really be very upset when you follow through all of a sudden. They may slam doors. They may scream at you. A lot of things can happen because they're not going to be happy. They're going to be like, what? They never follow through. Normally I get away with this. What is going on? So they're going to give you pushback, but hang in there, still follow through, no matter how terrible it gets. I'm just warning you, it may get terrible. But eventually, maybe even after 3 or 4 times, they start to realize, oh, they've changed. They are really meaning what they're saying. I can trust what they're saying. They're going to do what they said they were going to do. So just realize that that can be tough. And don't beat yourself up if you have not been doing a good job of that right now. You can start today. Like I said, every day's fresh with no mistakes. You get to start over. And if you need any support in that, I'll be happy to help you because every parent has, I always say the default thing you've heard me say before, it's the default that matters. You're going to have a week where you ask them too many times about something, to do something, and you want, though, the normal behavior to be always following through, even if you have a bad day or whatever and you're off a little bit, okay? So don't beat yourself up. Just make sure you're defaulting to following through. Okay, so the third element of healthy and effective communication is being responsive rather than being reactive. And Proverbs 15:1, again, says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Okay, some parts of being responsive rather than reactive are, number one, we need to control our emotions, okay? This is one that was hard for me because I grew up in a family that everybody just let the emotions fly. Whatever it was, it came out, okay? And I had to learn that that was not the best way to handle situations with my husband or my kids, okay? A lot of times when our child tells us something, we either hear something or about a situation maybe that happened with other kids that's shocking, or we see a behavior that we really don't like, we tend to just react instead of thinking about the best way to have that conversation or to deal with the situation. And it does take retraining. I had to retrain myself over and over and over to learn to not because I knew when I had teenagers, if I did that, they would never talk to me ever again about anything. And I did not want that because that's what happened, that happens in a lot of homes. Like when that happens, you shut down and you don't want to talk to them about anything. So instead, we need to search for understanding so that we can respond appropriately. I thought of a few examples that might help you with this. Say that your middle school daughter comes home, she's 6th grade, and she says, oh, I really like this boy at school. We're going to start dating. He asked me if I'd be his girlfriend, okay? Now, there's a couple of reactions you can have. If you're being reactive, you might say, absolutely not. We are not dating in middle school. That's too soon. You're not having a boyfriend, okay? We've all heard things like that, okay? Or you can say, well, that's interesting. Tell me a little bit more about this boy that you like. Gather some information. Also, you can ask, this is a really telling thing, is to say, what does it mean when you say you want to date? Because half the time, y'all, in 6th grade when they're young, it's not the same meaning that we have. They may say, oh, that means I'm going to sit with him at lunch and sit with him at the pep rallies or whatever, okay? It doesn't always mean the same thing. Sometimes it might in their head, but just clarify, because a lot of times when we're reactive and we don't take the time to ask the right questions, we're reacting to something that never was. You know, it's kind of like the lion thing that you're talking about when he was saying it's the lion from the Wizard of Oz. That's why he didn't have the 4 legs. So ask questions, and then that might lead to you being able to say, you know, that's great. That's normal for you to start to notice boys and for boys to notice you and for y'all to like each other. You know, though, since you can't drive, you really can't date. So, you know, we're going to do things in groups. You know, maybe they even go to a middle school dance, but they can still go to the dance in a group. You can make sure there's supervision. But it also provides a great opportunity for you to talk to your daughter or son, either way, about what does it look like when a boy respects you. You know, now that you brought this up, I would love to start to have conversations with you as you are getting to like people to know what to look for. What are character qualities you should be looking for? Take those, you know, opportunities to also go into other conversations that can be helpful. So I have a question. Which parent is the child going to go to the next time that they have something important in their lives? Are they going to go to the parent that said, absolutely not, cut them off, said, we're not dating in middle school? Or are they going to go to the parent that sat down and said, oh, tell me about this. Tell me about this boy you like. You see? Okay. All right. I thought of another example for older kids. With college students, you know, of course, they're wanting to have a lot of independence. And it's hard that first year when they're kind of breaking away, making more decisions on their own. But say that your child comes to you and says, I want to go on a spring break trip with some boys and girls that I'm friends with. And in your heart, you're like, ooh, I don't want you to do that, really. I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that. So again, you can freak out and say, absolutely not. We're not doing a trip with boys and girls, okay? And shut them down. All it's going to do is shut them down. Or you can start asking good questions to search for understanding. Hey, who's going on that trip? Tell me about it a little bit. What friends are going? Now, where is everybody going to be staying? Are the girls going to be on a separate floor? Are they going to be in a different condominium? Get information first, okay? So that you can respond and not react. Sometimes you may find out the boys are staying in a separate place. They just are all going to meet up at the beach or whatever. But gain information before you make any assumptions or make a decision about what your response is going to be. Another good question. Why is this trip important to you? I can tell that you feel very strongly about it. Why is it important to you that you get to go? I think that's always an interesting answer. Sometimes they just, you know, a big answer I hear a lot is, well, everybody's going on a spring break trip. So that's why it's important. But we still need to acknowledge, even though, you know, we're older, we get it's not the end of the world if they don't go. To them at that time, that's important, and you need to respect that. So there's a couple different things you can do with that. You might say, you know, if you already trust your child and the arrangements are somewhat okay, you might say, I'm not super thrilled about this, but I trust you. So I'm going to let you make the decision whether you want to go or not. But I do want us to sit down and talk about some things to keep you safe. So you might talk about group safety or whatever. Because they're so naive, y'all know. We all thought we knew everything at 18, and we don't. So there are situations we might need to go over with them. That's one response. Another response, and this may be after you walk away and talk to your spouse or whatever, you know, we're really not comfortable with this trip. Let me tell you why. But we know that going on a spring break trip is important to you. So let's see if we can figure out another arrangement that we are comfortable with. Or maybe you help them do a different trip altogether. But work with them to find a solution to that. They may even have a good solution if you're like, hey, well, what do you think? What could we do differently, you know, if you don't do that trip? They may not always be happy, but at least you're responding and you're not reacting, because they're going to come to you again if you respond. If you just overreact, they're never going to tell you. They'll sneak around behind your back and go do stuff that you don't want them to be doing because they're like, don't want to hear it from you. So just some things to keep in mind. Okay. The fourth thing, as we're talking about communication, effective communication, is it shows respect. And I call it the respect effect. The respect effect works, y'all. And I've already talked a little bit about some things that you're showing respect when you listen. When we think about the spring break conversation we just talked about, you respected them by asking questions and not just assuming you knew everything. You respected them by listening to the fact that the trip was important to them and why it was important. And, you know, you came up with a decision based on all of the facts, and then you sat down with them and explained why you were or were not comfortable, okay? So I think we need to always be reasonable. Be reasonable. Another way, and Whitney mentioned this last week, and it's so true. She said, you know, for kids, give them a heads up. And she was right, at work, you don't want to be hit with, you got to be at a meeting right now. Come on, you know, you got to stop everything you're doing and go. With kids, no matter what age they are, it's really good to say, you know, hey, I know that you're trying to finish that level on your game, but we're going to eat in a few minutes. And so I need you to get to a stopping place because we're going to eat in 5 minutes. Give them a heads up about things. That's being respectful, y'all. We don't like to drop everything immediately, do we? No, we're usually like, oh, give me a few more minutes to finish whatever we're working on. We got to treat them like people. Yes, they're little people, but we're training them how to be productive adults. Keep the end goal in mind. So make sure you're being respectful of them in the way that you're even asking them to do things. Be reasonable with what you're asking. Another thing I was thinking of with regard to this was a curfews, okay? I know there's a lot of different opinions on this, but when you're, say that you give your child a curfew of 10 o'clock and, you know, you're like, this is going to happen if you're not home right at 10. Well, yeah, I mean, it's not that that's not reasonable, but I'm going to explain to you a way to be a little more reasonable, okay? When I was in high school, I had a friend that knew that if she was not home on the button at the time they told her, that she was going to get grounded for the rest of the month. So guess what? I'm spending the night with her, and she's driving 90 miles an hour with me in the car because she's freaking out going, I'm going to be grounded for the rest of the month. Do you see what the problem is there? Okay? So be reasonable and say, listen, you need to make plans to leave on time so that you can get home on time. Remember, they're training, they're learning, right? If you're running 5 minutes late, please do not speed. Just contact us, tell us, hey, I know I should have planned my time better. I'm going to be 5 minutes late. I want you to know. Also keeps you from worrying, but you open the line of communication. So if they are running late, they can tell you and they feel comfortable about that, and you don't have a wreck because your child is flying to get home for the curfew. Be reasonable about the curfew. On occasion, one of my kids would call and say, so-and-so needed a ride, and they weren't planning to take that child home. But I was reasonable, and I was like, yeah, I know that's putting you past curfew, but yeah, absolutely, that's fine. Go ahead and take him home. Or maybe it's like, hey, we're almost finished with this movie. It's only 30 more minutes. Would it be okay if I stay and finish the movie? Be reasonable. Yes. And you know, if you want to talk about the future and helping them plan their time better, that's a good conversation to have. But remember, you're training them, okay? So you can always talk about what did or did not work in different situations later. Also, under respect, evaluate your own motives, okay? Think about, why am I saying no? And somebody told me one time, and I do think this is right, you really should say yes way more than you say no, okay? But ask yourself some questions, like, why am I saying no, or why am I feeling this way about this situation? So sometimes you're saying no because they're wanting you to go do something and you're exhausted because it's been a really long day. You do not want to get back out and go somewhere, right? That's a valid reason, but evaluate why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Maybe you're frustrated about something, so you're saying no because you're frustrated. There's lots of reasons you might say no or have a certain feeling that you have. This is an example that I think will be helpful. Again, it has to do with older kids, but anybody who's had college students knows that the first time that they come home from college, there's a little rub because they're used to having all this freedom, right? And then all of a sudden, like, you want to know they're safe still because they're in your house and you might have your own rules that you put in place or whatever. Well, I remember, it happened with both kids, actually, that we had to have this conversation. But I remember the first time Samuel came home, I was so excited. I had missed him so much. And I was like, oh, I'm so happy he's coming home. I'm going to have all this time with him. Well, he gets home, and he tells me all the things he's doing with his friends for the whole weekend. See, I see nods right here. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, right after they dump their laundry. So true. And I was like, well, no, I don't want you spending all this time with friends. I did overreact, not terribly, but I was not happy, and I had to go evaluate, why is it that I'm upset about this? And it's because I just wanted time with him. So I kind of backpedaled a little, and I said, okay, I'm sorry. I know you do really want to see your friends, and I understand that because it was high school friends that he hadn't seen in a while. And I said, I will say the reason I responded that way, which was not a good response, I'm sorry I responded the way I did, but I was so excited about you coming home, and I really want to have time with you. So could we sit and talk about the weekend and talk about like when you can spend time with me and Dad and when you're going to go with friends so that we can kind of all understand the schedule and agree on it, okay? So that worked much better because I actually got to see my child and he got to see his friends, and I understood he needed to see the friends. So going back over a few of the things that we've been talking about, the different elements. So number one, by going back and talking to him about it and saying, hey, I'm sorry, I did overreact, that's keeping the relationship first, okay? The second thing is I was clear. I tried to be clear with why I was upset after I figured it out, right? And told him, hey, this is why I was upset about this. Then I tried to respond. I said, I did share that I overreacted. I told him, I said, I'm sorry, I reacted the way I did it. I just got upset when I didn't think I was going to have time with you. But I backpedaled a little bit. It is possible to do that. And I said, so then I responded by saying, hey, I know that seeing your friends is important, and I do want you to have time to do that, but I want to see you too. So then we came to that compromise, and I showed respect for his feelings. So those are some of the things we had just been talking about in the different elements. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. Okay, the last element is effective communication is grace-filled, okay? It allows for failure and gives encouragement. And one thing I can think of that happened multiple times, I didn't do it as often now as I wish I had, but sometimes when you're evaluating what your child did, maybe they lash out at you about something. I had this thing because I learned, remember how I told you I was working on a lot of my own the way I communicated and responded. So I started doing this thing where I'd be like, I need you to go sit in your room, because I needed a timeout, if y'all know what I mean, for a few minutes to evaluate, like, am I thinking clearly? Am I making a good decision? So that gave me that time. I would say, hey, go sit in your room when they're little, go sit on your bed for timeout, okay? And then I could say, okay, how do I really need to respond to this? Because sometimes in the moment you're just so mad, right, that you will unfortunately react rather than respond sometimes. But sometimes your child has been having a really hard week, and they did lash out at you, and it wasn't okay. But a couple of times I walked in and I realized once I got to step back from it and control my own emotions, that's really what was going on. Yeah, they snapped at me, but there's a lot more behind what's going on. They're having a really hard time with their friends at school. So they got shocked because I walked in the room and said, let me give you a hug. I want you to know how much I love you. And I know that normally you don't respond to me that way, and obviously it was not right, but I forgive you, and I know that you've had a hard week. So let's just pretend this didn't happen and just keep moving on, okay? Sometimes we have to have grace, just like we want people to have grace for us when we lose our temper for a minute or we snap at somebody. Have grace for your kids. It's important. And also, remember, everybody's heard this, that failure is the first attempt at learning. They are learning, okay? Just like we talked about the curfew thing earlier. We can't assume that they're going to know that they have to, or know how they need to plan their time. That's something you kind of have to coach them in. Next time, think through this. realize you need to be ready to leave earlier. But be willing to talk to him about things and don't just jump to conclusions and jump to some sort of punishment without having grace and allowing for failure. It's going to happen. You're going to fail, and you're going to need to go to them and say, hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't respond well, and I am sorry about that. And then always encourage them. Just say, hey, you know what? You're going to make it through this. I'm so sorry this has been hard with your friends. Let's pray together. Let's pray for those friends. Give some sort of encouragement to them, okay? I think these are some really important things to remember as we're talking about all of this, is being grace-filled. One thing, since I have time, I'm going to go back to, let me see where it was. So we were talking about, the responding rather than reacting. That's another time you need to kind of evaluate the situation. I had cut out what I'm going to say now just because I didn't know if I'd have time. So this is kind of a funny story. So Rebecca was having a terrible day. She was about 3.5. And I was all about, I'm following through, okay? She had already been punished about 3 or 4 times. I had followed through. And she was having a major meltdown. I mean, major, okay? And I was so mad because she was not obeying what I had just said. And I was like, I'm determined. I'm going to follow through. She's got to listen. She's got to obey. And to spite me, because I had told her that she needed to go get in her bed, she crawled as slowly as she could down the hall. I mean, like purposely, like, Mom, I hear you, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to crawl down the hall just to irritate you. And it did. And it was so funny because Evan was like, Paige, listen, I understand follow-through is important, but she's so tired she can't think straight. It doesn't matter how she gets in the bed. She just needs to get there. And I was like, okay, you're right. So it is a situational thing. Look at the bigger picture with what's going on with communication. So anyway, if you've heard some of these things today, and some of them you're probably like, oh yeah, we've been doing fine on that. Others, you may need to, change what you're doing or, add some new things to your methods of communication. But just remember, thank goodness God has a lot of grace for us. I'm telling you, you're going to make lots of mistakes as a parent. And I feel like with Samuel, unfortunately, the oldest child gets kind of the brunt of everything because you're trying to figure it out. And so I've even gone back to him and been like, I learned better with Rebecca. I didn't always handle certain things. I go back and I always would try to talk to him about it. But God is so gracious, and he does have so much patience with us. And I'm so happy that he does. And he has so much grace for us. So let's make sure we're doing that with our kids too. Okay, we actually have a few minutes for questions. I prayed that God would make the time go well because I was worried I wouldn't get through all these slides. Gary the other day is like, hey, you have 5 slides. That's a lot. I was like, yeah, it is a lot. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. What questions do y'all have? It could be about this week or last week. You might have a question for Whitney about last week. Do you have any questions or comments? Some of you parents that are older who have lots of wisdom, I would love to hear your comments and anything you want to say that might be helpful. Yes, Carrie.
Well, I was just going to say, we had 3 kids. And we learned that there was wildly different things we had to do in parenting them.
Yes.
So, one you could look at and they would crumble and be compliant. You could get with a 2 before and he wouldn't be worse. He or she would be worse. So that's, first one we thought, man, we can do this, we got this.
We've all thought that.
So it's having to be humble and relearn what you thought you already knew is part of that process.
That's very true, yeah. So if you're watching online, Carrie was just saying they had 3 kids, and each one of them was very different. They had to parent each one very differently. And so he had to adapt and learn new ways to handle each child. He was saying one you could look at, and they would, melt and cry and be upset about what they did. And one, he said you could hit them with a 2x4, and they still wouldn't be compliant. So he's so right, and those of y'all who have raised kids know that. Each one is very different. And you will have to adjust little bits of how you communicate with each child differently. So, anything else? Yes, Carol. Uh-huh. They are, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. That's so true. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. If you're listening online, Carol was just saying, you were saying that, remember that they're, did you say struggling? Yeah, struggling little human beings, which is so true. And we do sometimes expect them to behave like adults. They're not going to. They're little people. And she also said, forgive yourself, which is also really important. And remember, we talked that first week about seeking God first. This is why that quiet time is also so important. It gives you that time to say, hey, we had a terrible day yesterday. There was a lot of yelling. I did not handle things well. Lord, please today help your Holy Spirit to just fill me and help me to handle this better. And that's another reason those little times with the Lord are important. So, anything else before we go? Okay. Oh, yes, Tina. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that through all of those,
Mm-hmm.
there are times that it only makes sense for a parent to sit down and pray.
Yes, so true.
And God can change things that we can't change.
Amen. Amen.
Trust that. And you did say pray with them.
Yeah, praying with them is so important. Yeah, even pray about how they're struggling, like to control temper or whatever. So, yes, very good. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a tough one. I do think you need to have a united front with your child. So if you're still not sure how you're going to handle it, you may need to take some time to go back and give your decision to the kids or whatever. And take it in a back room and talk about it privately. Because that's, again, they learn, oh, he's for this, she's not. How can I kind of pit them against each other? So we learned real quick, if one came and asked something, we'd say, have you asked your dad about this? Or have you asked your mom about this? Because they love to do that. Yeah, when they get older. Yeah. 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 It is hard. I mean, it is hard. And there's some things that you're never going to fully, agree with your spouse. And you have to come to some sort of a compromise. And sometimes we have to let go a little bit of our expectations. I'm not saying in every way, but you have to find some sort of a compromise to be able to work together, in parenting. It's hard, I know, because we come to a marriage with very different backgrounds, very different ways of seeing things. So